Hey everyone, I'm recording this on Friday the 13th. Okay, or technically, it's like 12:30 a.m. when I'm recording this, so it's actually Saturday the 14th, but, you wouldn't know that if I didn't say it. Anyway, so, I just got back from seeing the movie Freaky, which takes place largely on a Friday the 13th. It has font that's very similar to Friday the 13th when it's announcing the title and what day you're on. So, and of course, Freaky, it's a body swap thing. There's a body swap movie called Freaky Friday. There's a Friday the 13th. They could have called it Freaky Friday the 13th, but Paramount probably would have sued them. So, I decided I would talk about this movie for a review because, well, this is probably the biggest movie to come out in theaters since the big wave in August and September, because you had the trifecta of your Unhinged, your New Mutants, and your Tenet at late August, early September there, and those were the first movies, the first big movies, let's say, that were ushering in the reopen of theaters after they were shut down from COVID. And so they all had decent marketing budgets. You saw ads on YouTube. I don't have cable, but you could probably see them on regular TV. See them, online. There was, they had decent advertising budgets behind them. But since Tenet, a lot of other movies have come out that haven't had as much in the way of marketing. Your Honest Thief, that Kevin Costner movie that's out now, Come Play. These other movies that have, made a little bit of money, and then stuff that's bombed and you haven't seen any ads for them, like The Empty Man. And then there's some other stuff where, it had maybe a token theatrical release, but it's mostly pushing through for VOD. But Spell, that movie, I know, had something like that. But Freaky is the first movie since that little trilogy of movies at the beginning of the fall, that to have like a full-on actual studio marketing push behind it while it's going into theaters, where I've seen a lot of ads for it, which is odd because the trailer didn't drop too long ago. I mean, it was fairly kind of a surprise that they were pushing this out in theaters. So I figured, since there has been no other bigger movie that a full studio, not just like Focus Features, but a full studio is pushed out there, since that one, that it was worthy of doing a full-on video for it. And unlike those movies where at the time theaters in my state were closed when they first came out, so I had to go to other states to see them, this one I could see at my local Alamo as I normally like to see movies. So, let's talk about this movie. So it's directed by a guy named Christopher Landon, I believe. So most of the marketing behind this movie, if it talks about him, and a lot of the press behind this movie, like in things like, I have the new Fangoria here. Spoilers? I mean, Fangoria is known for its gory covers and everything, and it's not like a main character on there, but, So, the press has really been focusing on the last two movies this guy made were Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day to You. And it makes sense because Happy Death Day was taking a high-concept comedy premise and then fusing it with a slasher movie. In that case, it was Groundhog Day. And, there's other movies that have you wake up and it's the same day over and over again. There was Palm Springs recently this year on Hulu, which is also a good movie. That also used the same, you repeat the same day formula, but that one, it squoze it together with a slasher movie. I was okay with that film. Mostly, I didn't like two things about that movie. The first was that it was PG-13, and you just can't do a slasher movie in PG-13. I'm sorry. And the second was that it was extremely obvious who the killer was in that movie. Or maybe not to you, but to me, I knew it immediately. But maybe that's, if you watch enough movies, you kind of can tell that kind of thing. I didn't like the main character in that movie. I felt that her personality changed too much, scene to scene, that there was no progression to her character. But then Happy Death Day to You came out, the sequel, and that one was a bit more original. It pushed a lot of the slasher elements to the side, so I didn't mind that one being PG-13 as much. It's fully embraced this own weird time travel, Back to the Future type thing, while still being the same universe and the same sort of tonal sense of humor and everything. So I like that one a little bit more. But ultimately, those movies other people liked them more than I did. Though there was a Blumhouse maze at Halloween Horror Nights 2 years ago. It was half of it was Happy Death Day, and you kept walking through kind of the same rooms over and over again, and that was fun. So I wasn't a huge fan of those movies, but they're all right. A lot of people like them more. But Christopher Landon seems to. This isn't the first time he's smushed two movies together. He also did. He wrote Disturbia, which was basically the teeny bopper version of Rear Window with Shia LaBeouf in it. I like that movie fine as well. But he's done a couple other movies. He's not just the guy who takes a comedy movie and smooshes it with a slasher. He also wrote Paranormal Activities 2, 3, and 4. I like part 2 and 3. 4 is a piece of shit. And I guess he also wrote and directed the Marked Ones, which was sort of Paranormal Activity 3.5 or 4.5. I forget if it came out between 2 and 3 or 3 and 4. Or 4 and 5 for that matter, but regardless. I don't remember much of the Marked Ones. I remember it being at least better than part 4, but not as good as 2 and 3. Oh, and he also did, and this is kind of funny, because he also did Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, which is an okay movie also. I mean, this guy doesn't have the best track record, but he doesn't have a horrible track record either. But it's funny because Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, I've mentioned this in earlier videos before, that was part of a 2-movie deal that Paramount made with AMC and a couple other theaters a few years ago. It was actually that one and Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension, so another movie in that Paranormal Activity franchise, albeit one that I don't think Christopher Landon had anything to do with. But that was basically that they'd have a shrunken theatrical window, and then they'd cut the theaters in on some of the VOD profits. That was through Paramount, though, and Freaky is released by Universal, but while Scout's Guide was in the years ago, this was way before COVID, obviously, but now with COVID, you have this newish thing where they're trying to put movies out into more theaters than just Alamo or a couple indie theaters, while still having a very truncated theatrical window. And with Freaky, it recently was announced, I think just earlier this week, to be quite honest, that this was going to have a very truncated theatrical window where it was going to be 17 days. Now, of course, a couple months ago, when I talked about this in an earlier video, Universal and AMC came to an agreement after they kind of were butting heads over this thing where they were going to have about a 2 to 3 week window in theaters and then push it to premium video on demands, like the $20 to rent it kind of video on demand. But not necessarily pull it completely from theaters. It's just that the exclusivity was that time. And then they would cut in AMC theaters on some of those VOD profits. And I know the other two bigger chains, Regal and Cinemark, did not make the deal. So all the Regals are closed right now anyway, but if Regal were open, there's a chance that they might not have actually carried Freaky for not abiding by that theatrical window. But AMC is probably going to reap some of the profits, which they desperately need because they're on the verge of bankruptcy, when this thing gets pushed. I want to say I thought it was closer to like 21 or 25 days, but this one 17 days. So basically, 2 weekends and like half a week, and then you'll be able to rent this thing on iTunes and Amazon for like $20 or whatever. But at least it's a movie with an actual marketing push that it does have some exclusive theatrical release. Now, I don't know if the other theaters that aren't AMC are going to be cut in on this deal, like Alamo, which, normally, they show Netflix movies, this weekend they're showing that fucking Hillbilly Eulogy movie, so, they're fine not obeying the exclusivity window, but I'm not sure if some other theater chains that are still open, Carl is below the frame smelling my hand, I don't know if some of those other chains are getting cut in, or if they're SOL, and then they have to make the big choice about whether they're going to show the biggest movie that's coming out between Tenet finally winding down and maybe sort of Wonder Woman if it ends up coming out on Christmas at all. Though I did see the Promising Young Woman trailer in front of this movie, and that still has a Christmas date. I think it was originally going to release in April in the pre-COVID times. So it looks like that they'll still give that a limited release here. So it's just kind of funny that Landon did this one movie that was part of this experiment, and now he's doing this other movie that's also kind of part of this experiment. So it'll be interesting to see. box office gross wise, I think this thing is expected to pull in maybe $6 or $7 million this weekend, which will probably be the biggest opening weekend since Tenet, which is still not much. But if COVID weren't happening, this thing, it's rated R as opposed to Happy Death Day, but Happy Death Day grossed in like the 20s, or at least the first one did. So this one probably could have done mid-teens in the pre-COVID times. Otherwise, it's still going to be number one because there's no competition. But how much, I'm not sure where the ceiling is on it. We'll find out. When I went to the theater today, it's a Friday night and the parking lot is still dead, so people still don't want to go to the theaters because they're afraid or they don't know things are open. COVID's spiking again. Theaters are reclosing in Europe, so I can't really blame people for their fear, but it is what it is. So, but Christopher Landon, it seems like this might be one of the first movies he's co-written with somebody. I'm not sure because I didn't check the entire credits. I just looked at his filmography, and he's mostly done writing. He's done some directing beforehand. He did another anthology movie I've only vaguely heard about with Nick Stahl. But I don't know if the Catfish guys who did the later Paranormal Activity sequels, I don't know if he wrote that with them, but I think he has sole writing credit on the Paranormal Activities he wrote. But he co-wrote Freaky with a guy named Michael Kennedy, and I looked at his filmography, and it looks like he's mostly known as like an animation guy, not even a writer for animation. He's like an animation consultant for Family Guy and American Dad, which is odd because Freaky is obviously part comedy, but it doesn't have the sense of humor that Family Guy and American Dad. It's a different humor there. So he's co-writing this with somebody else, and as I just mentioned, unlike Happy Death Day, which was PG-13 and so couldn't really fully embrace that slasher mentality, Freaky is rated R, and it makes good use of the gore. There's some pretty good gore in here. Some of it is CGI enhanced, and some of it is practical. Probably most of it's practical, let's say. And while it's not anything that is super original as far as slasher movie kills, it's still gorier than I probably would have expected this movie to be otherwise. So I was pretty happy with that, being the horror movie guy I like. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this, you already know the basic premise, but this is a body swap movie, and body swap movies used to be a very, very popular genre for comedies, especially in the 80s. You had the original Freaky Friday, which is in the 70s, the one with Jodie Foster. And then there was a year, maybe 1 or 2 years in the 80s where, a ton of them, I think there was 5 in 1 year at one point. So you had things like Vice Versa, which is one that I liked as a kid because the HBO showed it all the time. 18 Again with George Burns. Though obviously there's the Freaky Friday remake in the 90s or early 2000s, I forget which, with Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis. And I'm forgetting some other ones. I guess you can count Big as a body swap movie, even though it's just a kid who grows up. He doesn't swap with anybody, but, so there were a lot of these types of movies that came out in a very brief period where it was big. Oh, there was the other one with Dudley Moore and Kirk Cameron that I can't remember the name of right now, but that was also another body swap movie in the 80s. I think that may have come out the same year as Vice Versa. So it was this high concept that really captured people's imaginations in the 80s for some reason. So Freaky is combining that high concept, which has been obviously done many times before. Most recently, there was a Zac Efron, Matthew Perry movie. I think that might have been called 17 Again, actually, now that I think about it. I remember that one being mediocre. Though Thomas Lennon was good in it. So it's combining this sort of well-worn comedy subgenre with slasher. And Freaky is definitely more of a slasher than Happy Death Day was, probably. In fact, the Freaky has a cold open that looks like it's a Friday the 13th clone, as far as, the characters are maybe a bit more modern teenager hip kind of thing. This movie is a bit more hashtag quote-unquote woke than obviously the 80s slasher movies would have been. There's this, but in a way that's not as annoying as like the Black Christmas reboot that came out last year. It's in a charming and much more organic way, I'd say. So it can still be sort of politically correct while still being a gory movie. It's still being a slasher movie and still being fun. Which is odd because Vince Vaughn is the main star and he's kind of famous for being a right winger. But this movie does meld those things pretty successfully. It is definitely more comedy than it is horror, only because I can't imagine anyone actually being scared by this movie. So it's more it fits more into the gory comedy than it is like a full horror comedy. It's more comedic than say Scream. But it doesn't tip over into parody really. I mean that cold open that I mentioned where Vince Vaughn has like a mask on that is kind of Jason-esque, but not within copyright infringement territory. That cold open is really just kind of an homage before like the movie proper begins, and that sequence is really fun. That really just kind of thrusts you into like, okay, this is still going to be a violent movie despite the fact that it's a comedy kind of thing. But yeah, the premise of the movie basically is that after this cold open, the killer, who's called the Blissfield Butcher, played by Vince Vaughn, gets like a hold of like an Aztec dagger, and later on he attempts to stab our protagonist, who's played by Catherine Winnick, I think her name is, who plays a girl named Millie, and then they swap bodies and they have like 24 hours to swap back. Standard setup for this, except for one party being a serial killer. So I mean, there's not much else you really have to say about the plot. That's pretty much it. You have Millie's best friends, a gay man and a black girl. There's a boy on like the football team she has a crush on, who's not like a complete jock asshole, as opposed to every other football player portrayed in the movie who is an asshole. Let me just talk about Vince Vaughn first, I guess. When I looked up Vince Vaughn's filmography, because I couldn't remember the last thing I'd seen him in, with the exception of this really bad comedy that's on Hulu right now called The Binge, which had a premise that's very similar to The Purge, except instead of every crime being legal for 24 hours with a stress on murder, it's just that drugs are illegal every day of the year except for once, so everybody just binges drugs this one year. I mean, the movie doesn't work. It's not particularly funny, and I couldn't buy into the universe, but he's in that. But I was looking at his filmography just to see when was the last time I saw him in a movie I liked. And I had to go back to 2006 and 2007 to Wedding Crashers and, to a lesser extent, The Breakup, because I did like both of those movies. But since, he made a lot of really bad garbage comedies. The Dilemma, the sperm donor movie, that name I can't remember. I mean, it's just a lot of garbage. I mean, not that Vince Vaughn has ever been a super great actor anyway. I mean, he was famously horribly miscast as Norman Bates in Gus Van Sant's almost shot-for-shot remake of Psycho. But for a while, he was churning out some pretty good comedies. Wedding Crashers, I really like Dodgeball. That's a really funny movie that still holds up. And obviously he had a small role in like Anchorman and its lesser sequel. But, for a while, and I don't know if it has to do with the fact that he became openly conservative and maybe he was blackballed a little bit in cinema. But then he kind of had a switch where after he had a couple comedies that really sucked and bombed, like Couples Retreat, which I think was just an excuse for the actors to go to Bora Bora. They were doing the Adam Sandler school of having a studio pay for your vacation. He started making like gritty indie violent movies. I've heard good things about that, like Cell 99 or something. I can't remember the full name of the movie. But he also did like a couple movies with Mel Gibson, another famous conservative. But yeah, I have not. It's been, almost like a decade and a half since I've last seen Vince Vaughn in a movie I liked. And in this movie, Vince Vaughn is very good in it. Like, as a over 6 foot tall man who's, I think he's in his 50s by now, probably, to play a teenage girl, he could have gone super over the top and arch with it to the point where he's playing a parody of a teenage girl and it doesn't fit the actual actress who's in her 20s playing a teenage girl. Like, you see that sometimes in body swap movies where you see the characters pre-swap, and then when the characters swap later, the actor who's playing the other actor's character doesn't do it right. Like, in Vice Versa, Judge Reinhold, after he swaps with Fred Savage, seems to be playing the Fred Savage character, like, 3 years younger than the Fred Savage was playing the Fred Savage character, so it doesn't quite work out. But in this movie, it works pretty well. Vince Vaughn does a good job of portraying the actual teenage girl character we've seen, so it doesn't feel like Vince Vaughn is doing something that's more arch and more of a parody than the other actress we've seen portraying technically the same character. So he is very good in that, and just, using his look and physicality as part of the humor and everything. So this is definitely, hands down, the best I've seen Vince Vaughn in a long fucking time. And the other main character, played by Catherine Winnick, I swear that's her name, but I might be wrong on that. I should pull up notes when I film these things. She, for the first act of the movie, she obviously has to play this teenage girl. And probably the biggest problem I have with the movie, and I don't have many problems with the movie, I'll just say that up front, but the biggest problem I have with the movie is a problem that a lot of teen movies like this have. Not that this falls into like the She's All That, but where you cast a very attractive actor or actress, and then the movie wants you to believe that this person is not as attractive as they are, because this actress is very well within the range of conventionally attractive. Like, in any normal high school, she'd definitely be, like, the prettiest or second prettiest girl in this high school. But the movie wants you to believe that she's bullied and looked down upon. Now, the movie does, to its benefit, it's not doing She's All That, where it's like, oh, she's ugly because she's wearing glasses and has overalls on, which was parodied in, Not Another Teen movie many years ago at this point. But the movie sort of stresses that it's more about economics that she's bullied because her family's a little bit poorer. But the movie doesn't fully sort of embrace that because of the very nice house that her family lives in. Because the movie portrays her living with her mother, who's sliding into alcoholism because her husband, so the main character's dad, died about a year prior. And then her sister is like a cop, and this is just a small town called Blissville. But unless that house was paid off prior to the father-husband's death, that house seems too good for what this movie wants us to believe is this family's economic strife, where, the mother is pretty much a saleswoman at like this discount clothing place, like kind of like it's kind of portrayed to be like an uptown cheapskate type place, but maybe not as thrift or consignment-y. So yeah, it never really makes sense that this attractive actress would ever be bullied. And if she's going to be bullied for being the poor girl, the movie needed to do a better job of making her be like lower middle class, as opposed to being in this very nice suburban neighborhood where her family probably still has more income than the average member of the audience in it right now. So that's probably the biggest complaint I'd have with the movie as far as the suspension of disbelief. Otherwise, this actress is very good because, the reason that a body swap movie would attract actors is because actors like to show range. So if you can play two very different roles in the same movie, that's something that is fun for actors. So Vince Vaughn being able to play a Jason-type serial killer, albeit with more dialogue, and a 16 or 17-year-old girl, that's got to be a fun challenge for an actor. And then this actress, she does basically the same thing. She in the first act of the movie has to basically play a teenage girl, and her character is portrayed as maybe a little bit sheltered, a little bit shyer. She definitely has the trauma of her father dying. Like, personality-wise, her character feels more 15 than she does, like, 17, and there's obviously, in high school, there's kind of a big difference in maturity there, where she still has, like, Pitch Perfect 2 posters. I mean, that movie came out years ago. I was still working in the theater when that came out. I wasn't even manager. I think I was still porter back then. So that's how long ago that movie came out. And just, like, a poster of, like, one of the guys from Panic at the Disco there, so even that seems a little dated, I guess, but I don't know. But she plays that, and then she has to play basically a gruff, very silent serial killer who's gone from being 6'5", 6'4" Vince Vaughn into this like 5'5", petite blonde girl, and she does a really good job with like the steely gaze of like the dead-eyed, like angry serial killer kind of thing. She has less to do in the movie because of that than Vince Vaughn. Vince Vaughn gets to like chew the scenery and stuff. But both of them are really good at doing that. And, the actress does a good job of doing a version of what Vince Vaughn was doing in the first act, just as Vince Vaughn does a good job of doing what she does with her character in the first act. And then the supporting characters are all fun and likable, of the ones that are supposed to be likable at least. And then some characters are added to be assholes and to be cannon fodder, because this is a slasher movie. So I don't really have any problem with the acting or anything. The acting great. Because this movie is a throwback to two different genres in the 80s, the body swap comedy, though that extended before and after the 80s, and the slasher movie. I like that the guy who plays Cameron in Ferris Bueller's Day Off shows up in this movie. He plays the shop teacher, who's really an asshole, and he does a really good job in the movie, so it was cool to see him in there. They put like a legacy there. And I'm sure there's a couple other Easter eggs for horror fans in there. The only one that really stood out to me was there's a homecoming football game that happens toward the end of the first act. One of the football players is named Strode. You see the name on the back, so obviously Laurie Strode from Halloween. There's probably a couple other hidden nuggets there that I wasn't paying attention to because I was invested in the movie and the story. But there's like fun little things like that. So the movie ends up being essentially like the goal of the movie. Obviously they switch bodies, and then the girl wants to switch back in her own body. The movie never really tells us if the serial killer is okay being in the girl's body or if he just wants to switch to a different body. The movie makes it clear that he's frustrated being in this less powerful body that can't just throw people around and shit, and he does have a bit more difficulty killing people because of that, for the most part, but he also has the subterfuge of appearing as someone else, so there's pluses and minuses to it. But the main crux of the movie is that our female protagonist in this male serial killer's body wants to switch back. There's a ticking clock. It has to be done before midnight that night, and they also need to get this dagger out of police evidence. And also there's the normal stuff about convincing people that you're really you in this other body, and and there's a lot of funny gags about that because people know what the killer looks like because of a police sketch after this. And so there's a lot of fun like that, but basically, if you've seen a slasher movie or if you've seen a body swap movie, you kind of basically know how the movie's going to progress as it goes on. There's not many surprises on a plot level. So, what does that leave us with? That basically leaves us with the characters, which I liked. The characters are all fun, no problem with the characters. I enjoyed all of the characters. But that leaves us with, does the humor work, and does the gore work? The humor works. I did not laugh. I did not have any gut-busting laughs, but I did have a steady number of laughs within the movie. There's also one scene in the movie. Well, there's one scene in the movie that's charming and funny, and there's one scene in the movie that actually does start to bring out some emotion. It's the dressing room scene. I won't go into what it is, but if you see the movie, you'll know it. So I was surprised by being able to actually throw some emotion to this, wild high concept. But the humor mostly works. I don't think there's any jokes in the movie that out and out fail or don't work. It's just some are really funny and some are just like, okay, that's funny, but even if you don't laugh, you just kind of be like, oh yeah, sure. So there's sort of a mix of that, but there's no joke that made me groan or that outright failed to me. So humor is a plus. Gore, I would have liked the movie to maybe have a higher body count, because I'm trying to count in my head right now how many people die. I think it's an even 10. As far as victims go. I might be off by 1 or 2, but I think there's about 10 deaths in this movie. So I probably would have liked a bit more, and I would have liked, not necessarily if the gore goes over the top, because if you go over the top with gore, it becomes a little too silly. It starts to go into like Evil Dead 2 territory or something like that. Or even even like a Freddy versus Jason type territory. I'd say like the gore, it's certainly there's a couple kills in this movie that are less than realistic, but none of them strain the credulity of physics or anything. Like, there's one kill in the movie that you think would probably there'd be more resistance without spoiling it. But every other kill in the movie seems still within the general realm of believability, I guess. Except for the fact that maybe they're more skillfully executed. Pun not intended at the time, but I guess now, than if somebody were trying to do them in real life. But I was at least happy that it did have actual slasher-level gore that made full use of the R rating as opposed to Happy Death Day, which, they did the PG-13 on it. But, as I walked out of the movie, I mostly just said to myself, you know what, that was fun. And, it doesn't reinvent the wheel, it doesn't do anything super original or anything. Even one of the deaths is sort of taken from Jason X, I think. There's the normal slasher type weapons. You got your chainsaws, you got your spears, you got your knives. I guess there's a funny one with a non-conventional weapon early on. That's probably the most goofy of the kills, I suppose. But it delivers the goods, and it was fun. I went in expecting a R-rated slasher body swap comedy, and it gave me that successfully, and I had a lot of fun with it. So, the visual style of the movie uses a lot of what I'd call haunted house lighting during certain scenes, where you either have a heavy red light or you start to use like black light stuff. There's like an indoor mini golf course. There's a dance toward the end. There's a couple other scenes like that, so it makes use of that kind of lighting, which I tend to like in movies, even if it's not particularly realistic. Usually they find a way to incorporate it in a way that it is, so it matches the settings in this movie, just like it matches in like the finale of that movie, The Guest, which I only just saw this year and really, really enjoyed that movie, by the way. Adam Wingard, I think, directed that one. Simon Barrett wrote it? Yeah. I'm forgetting names sometimes, I'm getting old. So that was basically the visual look of it. But yeah, there's not much really to say about the content of the movie. I mean, I could talk about individual like little things I liked about it, but then that gets a little too spoilery. So let's say that if you have a theater near you that's open and showing the movie, and you're not afraid or concerned about going to a theater, when this comes out on premium video on demand, I assume they're going to be charging the $19.99. Most movie tickets are cheaper than that, so it's actually less expensive to go see this in a theater, assuming you buy no concessions, than if you rent it VOD. Even with the different fees, and I bought a Pellegrino for this movie, it still only came out to a little bit more than I would spend for VOD. So, I'd say it's worth going to see in the theater. It's not, a big epic blockbuster that demands to be seen on the big screen or anything, but, a movie like this, and people aren't going to the movies. Theaters have attendance capacity restrictions and all that stuff, so you're not going to see this in a crowded theater, which is unfortunate because this is a movie that could really stand for a polite but rowdy crowd that cheers and laughs together kind of thing. But this is a kind of movie that can be made enjoyable by an audience that's really into it. I mean, There weren't many people in the audience for my movie because of capacity restrictions, and it wasn't a sold-out show, but there were still enough people there laughing along that it helped to push some mild laughs into harder laughs as it went on. So, yeah, if you're willing to and you're able to, yeah, go check it out in the 17 days. It may still be in theaters after the 17 days, but, while it's still in that exclusivity window. But yeah, that's freaky. I mean, it doesn't reinvent the wheel or anything, but it's a really fun movie. So, I don't know when the next... I shouldn't say big movie, but I don't know when the next movie with a decent marketing push is going to be. Maybe it'll be Wonder Woman. It looks like Promising Young Woman. They might put out... I don't know how much they're going to push for it, but I did see... It's a brand new trailer in front of this one. It's not the trailer I saw earlier in the year. So they did cut a new trailer for it with the new Christmas date on it. I don't know. I also saw a trailer for... I think it's called Nomadland, and it had a rating I'd never seen before. It said rated R for full nudity, not full frontal nudity, not graphic nudity. It just said for full nudity. I've never seen a rating with just those three words together, so that was interesting. And because I saw this at Alamo, it did have its specially curated pre-show, which is one of the main reasons I love going to Alamo as opposed to other theaters. So... it seems like they had enough time to create a pre-show for this one as opposed to when they first reopened and they just kind of threw some stuff together. My friend Andrew said they just had like kung fu stuff in front of Honest Thief, which had nothing to do with that movie. But this one, you had trailers. They showed old trailers for some horror comedies. You had Society, you had Slaughter High, you had Student Bodies, you had Shocker. And then it also showed trailers for body swap movies, such as Vice Versa, that Dudley Moore movie, that George Burns movie. Also I had for the Jeff Fahey movie Body Parts, which I guess is somewhat thematically similar to this movie, where it's your body's out of your control type thing. I don't know. I haven't seen the movie in a while. I gotta give Body Parts another spin if it's available to stream anywhere. I think I saw it on Amazon or Shudder or something. But it had that specially curated pre-show, and so I really enjoyed that. I'm glad that they were showing those, because I really like when they do that. That's really fun. It's because the last two movies I saw at Alamo, when the Alamo first opened here, post-COVID, North Carolina, for the Dismembering the Alamo shows, it seemed like they were sort of pre-packaged. Like they weren't, they didn't seem like they were new. It seemed like something they already had for whatever. But this one definitely was pushed toward Freaky, since it had both the body swap and the old comedy slasher trailers attached to it. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, I think I covered everything I wanted to say about this movie here. But yeah, it gets a recommendation from me. I really enjoyed it.